Welcome to Sputnik, orbiting the world with me, George Galloway.
And me, Gayatri.
Dr. Ernesto Che Guevara is the man of our era, a revolutionary internationalist. He began life as a physician, healing the sick, curing the lame, shaking hands with lepers.
Che did explain that from the start, all revolutionaries begin from feelings of love. He loved humanity and wanted to help set it free from the sicknesses of oppression, poverty, and hopelessness.
His daughter, Dr. Aleida Guevara, is also a revolutionary physician, and we spoke to her, alas, unfortunately, just before the seismic change in relations between Cuba and the United States. We talked to Dr. Guevara in London about Cuba, her life, her parents, and her children's 3 grandfathers. Dr. Aleida, you are a medical physician. Cuba is fantastically famous for its biomedical industry and its health system, which has become admired around the world, indeed has traveled all around the world. How did Cuba get to be so good at healthcare?
From the beginning of the revolution, our head commander, Fidel Castro, was always extremely worried by the health of its people. But from the very beginning, we realized that it was much easier to prevent an illness instead of having to cure it. Therefore, from the start, we had a public health system fully free for everyone, but on top of that, we had this focus on prevention, and together with this, education of the people, because you cannot convince someone of the need of doing some things differently if that person doesn't have a certain level of education. So the medicine in Cuba, from the very beginning, had to do with the practice of solidarity. And this is what we started to show to our people, and this is how we were educated from the very start. And this reached a point where at the beginning of the revolution, a lot of Cuban doctors went to the United States. We had very few left, so we started training this revolutionary doctor that didn't have a private consultation. Everything is for the state, everything is for the people. But on top of that, in 1963, so we have the revolution in 59, and in 63, we have the revolution in Algeria, where they needed a lot of doctors, and this is the first international brigade of doctors. Many doctors went to Algeria. We didn't have a lot, but we wanted to share the very little that we have, and this is how we started to grow as a people.
And as an instrument of solidarity, medicine has proved tremendously successful. In the poor barrios in Venezuela, for example, where most of the people, for most of the time, could never have dreamt of having a doctor, there are Cuban doctors there in the poorest areas performing miracles. The operation to cure cataract problems amongst people, this has operated and given sight to so many people. Tell us about that.
Bueno, es que a través del ALBA, es decir, cuando
with ALBA, in the ALBA Treaty, when we started to wake up as a continent, not just as a people, but as a continent, as a unity of different people. Venezuela changed its destiny with the arrival of President Chavez, and they needed a lot of help at that time. And the very beginning, the first thing to do is to educate, because for people to be free, it has to be educated. When we started with this campaign, we realized that there were some people who wouldn't come near us. They didn't want to learn how to read and write. And why not? Because they couldn't see. So they were ashamed in a way. And when we started to diagnose this problem, we could see that the problem was only cataracts. It's a very simple surgery. It takes a few minutes only. So Fidel Castro, the commander-in-chief decided that it wouldn't only be a campaign to teach people how to read and write, but we also needed to carry out these surgeries to give people their sight back and for them to be ready to choose. If they wanted to learn how to read and write, they would be able to, and not because of this physical barrier. So in that sense, we started with this kind of surgeries, and the first patients who were given their sight back, there was a very old man who said, "This is a miracle." And then we went from Latin America to Africa and the Middle East. But the problem that we've seen, and we've seen it with the medical colleges in these countries, sometimes they don't want to do it. In Argentina, for instance, they don't let us work in their territory. No Cuban doctor can work there. 48,000 Argentinians have been had the surgery in the border with Bolivia. Between Argentina and Bolivia, we had two hospitals there. And the solidarity gets to these patients that receive this free surgery. So we have more than 40,000 Argentinians who have had this surgery, and we managed to do a very small hospital within the country. Argentina is a very big country, and those who would come from the south all the way to the north would have to travel for hours in an omnibus, and on the way back it could be dangerous because it's a simple surgery, but it's still people are fragile afterwards. So we tried to make a small medical unit, fully free services, to start giving this service to Argentinians within their country, educating several Argentinian ophthalmologists to do it, and they would have a Cuban advisor. And we have managed to give this surgery to 5,000 Argentinians within Argentina, but the best is that it's called Ernesto Che Guevara. That's the name of the hospital in Córdoba, Argentina.
I heard you speak at the Latin American conference in London at the TUC in November, and you made the point that everything in Cuba is not perfect. And on the same day, the interim ambassador of Cuba in London made the point that there are changes coming in Cuba, but that those changes are for a better socialism, not a transformation back to capitalism. Tell us, if you will, some of the problems that still remain in Cuba and what kind of changes we can expect in the coming months and years.
The first problem that we have in Cuba is the blockade imposed to us by the USA for more than 50 years. It is very easy to talk about the blockade, but it's extremely difficult to live it. It's a situation that is extremely difficult for the Cuban people. I always give very simple examples. A little baby, 8 months old, a little girl, she had a bleeding in her intestines, and the specific medication that she needed, unfortunately, has a patent in the USA. So nobody gives Cuba this medication. If the USA finds a company who is selling this to Cuba, they can receive a fine of $5 to $10 million, or they can forbid for the products of this particular company to be sold in the USA. So obviously it is extremely difficult to find a company who will sell this medication. Sometimes we need 5 or 6 intermediaries in order for the FBI not to detect where the drugs are coming from, and this means it's extremely expensive for Cuba to get these drugs. This would be one of the main problems that we have. If the blockade stops today, tomorrow, the Cuban economy will flourish immediately. We spend thousands and thousands of millions of dollars because of the blockade. Internally, Cuba is a country that has been learning how to go ahead, how to go forward. We learn from our mistakes. We're not perfect. We're men, we're women, and therefore we commit mistakes. We've earned the right to rectify our own mistakes, and we have to do it ourselves. Nobody else can do it for us. We listen to opinions, especially if they come from friends of Cuba. Of course, we will take those opinions into account. There are problems with urban transport. It's very bad, extremely bad. We also have a lot of housing issues. This is a very big problem for us. And we've achieved a lot in the last few years, but we still haven't done enough. We have to keep going, especially for the campesinos living in the countryside. We have to improve the life of the campesinos, peasant farmers, who at times live in conditions that are very bad. So we have to find a solution for this. And we also have problems because we live in today's world. We don't live in another planet. So there is an economic crisis affecting everyone, and it is affecting us as well. At a certain point, the Cuban government realized that 500,000 people were working, receiving a salary, without producing anything. And this is unviable in economic terms. So at the time, these 500,000 people would have to lose their jobs. But how do you do this in a socialist system? How can you leave a worker without work? So we had to find alternative solutions, and those that we found at the time were to make these people who would end up without their state jobs to do something by themselves. But this is also a risk for the Cuban society, because when people start to think only about their own pockets, sometimes they forget that they live in a different society where education is free, health is free. Sometimes they can forget these things. And this is a big issue that we have to face. And this is what we've been doing lately, to think more about how to create cooperatives and not about individuals. But you cannot force people to form cooperatives. You have to make them understand, you have to make them accept, and then they can put it into practice.
Socialism in the 21st century is a new challenge, and we'll talk more about that after the break. Welcome back to Sputnik. We are talking with Dr. Aleida Guevara, one of the new figures in the Cuban Revolution, traveling the world, talking about Cuba's achievements, but also not afraid to discuss Cuba's problems, as we were doing in the first half. Dr. Aleida, welcome back to Sputnik. I, as you can see, am a very big collector of photographs and other memorabilia connected to your father, Comandante Che Guevara, and I wanted to go through some of these pictures with you, because there are some questions arise of interest out of all of them, I hope. Let's look at this one first, which of course depicts two of the great leaders, including the Comandante en Jefe, Fidel, with your father, Comandante Che. I wonder if you often think about the coincidence, the kismet, destiny of their meeting. If they had not met, everything in Cuba and everything in the world actually would be rather different. They met more or less by chance. And the relationship between them is one of the great pairings in history. There are not many other such examples. What do you remember as a child, and what have you learned in the rest of your life about the relationship between your father and Fidel?
Hace algún tiempo
some time
yo
ago,
tuve que hacer el prólogo de un libro de mi
had to
papá.
write a prologue for a book about my father, about the time when he was in Congo. So I went to see my uncle Fidel, because since the moment I was born, Fidel has been my uncle. So I went to see my uncle, I sat down with him and I asked him, why Congo? Why the Congo? And he gave me a very clear explanation, a lengthy explanation, and towards the end of the conversation I asked him, I said to him, Uncle, tell me, some people are saying things about you and my father, you having disagreements, discussions. I said, he said to me, when we were prisoners in Mexico, I gave this order. I said, don't say what your political affiliation is. What did you think your father did? Not only did he say he was a communist, he also started a lengthy discussion with the henchman in the prison about Stalin's personality. The result, we were all freed except for your father. When I went to tell him, but you went against my direct orders, I realized that your father couldn't lie. He simply couldn't lie. So the discussion was over before it started. What could I discuss with him? The only thing that I have to do was work a bit harder to take him out of prison. So I think that this is something that was really important in this such relationship between them. This is something my father always remembered, and from that point onwards he always respected Fidel as a military commander, because he always responded for each one of his men. And this is something that united them forever. That evening when I was talking to Fidel, I started to smile, and he asked me, what are you laughing about? Why are you smiling? And I said, Uncle, you haven't realized, but you are talking about my father in the present tense, as if he was about to come by the door. And he looked at me very seriously. He said, no, your father is present.
Well, I once asked Fidel, does he think about Che? He said that Che is often in his dreams, and he's not dead in the dreams, that he is still alive in these dreams long after he was dead. It's a very complicated but a very beautiful answer, and in a way you have just confirmed it.
Claro, y es que
yes, of course.
Igual que mi papá
because Fidel, like my father, did not accept the death of their companions. It's very difficult to accept something like that, especially when these people have signified so much for each other. So it's very wonderful lives that come together. When my eldest daughter was born, she was born through a cesarean section, and when I opened my eyes after the anesthetic, next to me I had Ramiro Valdez and Oscar Fernandez Melo. They were both there with their, as if they'd been in the surgery room, and I looked at them and I said, what are you doing there? And they both looked at me and they said, your father is not here, that's why we are here. And the following day, my uncle went to see me, my uncle Fidel, and he discussed with me the name of my daughter. He wanted to give her her name, and I said, but grandparents don't have that right, it's parents. He was very upset that day because I had made a commitment with the father of my daughter, and I couldn't go against it, so I had to give her the name that her father had chosen, and the father wasn't in Cuba to discuss with Fidel, or they could have discussed it amongst themselves. I had to assume this responsibility, and my uncle was quite upset about it. And a few years later, I got divorced. My uncle called me immediately. How are you feeling? How are you? We were talking, and he could hear that my eldest daughter was saying something, and he said to me, is the child there? And I said yes, and he said to me, the one with the ugly name. name, because he never accepted this name that was given to my daughter. And I said to him, yes, she's here. He said, I want to speak to her, put her on the phone. And I said, Fanny, come, your Uncle Fidel wants to speak to you. He listened to me. He said, no, I'm not his uncle, I'm his grandfather. I said, Fanny, your grandfather Fidel wants to speak to you. Would you like to speak to him? She says, yes. And they started to have a conversation. And the following day, I went to school to collect my daughter. And when I arrived, the teacher from this group said to me, listen to me, there is a problem. I've told your daughter that children only have 2 grandfathers, but she says to me, she insists she has 3 of them, and there is no way of changing her mind. And I said to her, listen, the thing is, she spoke to Fidel yesterday, and it was her grandfather, and she said, okay, she has 3 grandfathers then, that's fine. End of story.
Let me ask you the question that every person watching this will have in their mind. Your father was one of the greatest human beings who ever lived. He is a hero to hundreds of millions, maybe billions of people. What's it like being the daughter of such a man?
I have had the great privilege of having a wonderful mother, and this woman who loved my father so much always said to us that we will get many things because we were the children of Che Guevara. But we needed to learn to let that go, to be very firm on this earth and let this go by, these things that we haven't earned by our own effort. And this was amazing for us. It is true that a lot of people love us because simply we are the children of this man they adore. Nonetheless, we learned the lesson very well, and the things that we haven't earned ourselves as human beings, we let them through. And we've lived very well, quietly, with a lot of honor, because we are the children of this man and this woman. But I've always said the following: it's not important to be the daughter of one person or someone else, but it is very nice to know that your mother and father have loved each other so much that you are the fruit of this union, and this makes of you a wonderful person. But at the same time, I've been very fortunate because I have lived and I've been educated in Cuba with this joy of life that we have in Cuba, with this courage, this strength. I love very much my people, and I feel very proud to be Cuban. And in that sense, there was this commitment every day, being the daughter of my people with dignity, because I owe so much to them. Maybe I need 2 lives to do it in order to repay all the love I've received.
Not only did you learn that lesson well, I lived in the same apartment block as your brother Camilo, and I asked him that question, and he gave me a very similar answer. So your mother taught you both very well. I just want to ask, I've only got time to ask you one more question, and I'm asking you it as a doctor. Fidel told me many years ago to stop smoking cigars. In fact, he was angry when he learned that I had disobeyed this order and I was still smoking cigars. He said, we need you more than we need your money for the tobacco. Your father was a very big cigar smoker, and this image is completely inseparable from him. Did he smoke in the house around the children?
Sí, fumaba en la casa,
pero he did smoke at home, but not when we were there, not when we were present. I don't remember, but it's true that I lived with him for a very short time, but I don't remember him smoking in front of me. And I've always said he was still smoking because Celia and I were not old enough, or he would have stopped forever. We would have made sure we would have protected him enormously in that sense. And this is, I have to say, the only thing that we regret is not just not having our father with us, but us not being old enough to accompany him.
Dr. Aleida Guevara, thank you very much indeed. Che definitely lives amongst us. What a remarkable woman, what a moving story. We hope you enjoyed the interview, and whether you celebrate it or not, that you have a wonderful Christmas.
Remember to stay in touch with us on Twitter at RT_Sputnik or on Facebook on Sputnik on Russia Today. Merry Christmas from me, Gayatri.
And from me, George Galloway. It's been marvelous.